split even though it's Friday. I'm known to do that on Fridays. Alternator. Everybody knows what the alternator is, right? The alternator. It is properly mounted. If there's no loose or missing bolts, it is not cracked. All the wires are tight. Okay? The alternator is belt driven. You have to tell them it's belt driven. Okay?
Belt driven.
Yep, the serpentine belt. And you can tell it's belt driven because there's the belt. Everybody see that?
Okay.
When you do this, and like I said, you don't get partial credit for anything. You don't get half a point for everything, half a check, whatever. It's either you get it or you don't. Okay. That's what I said. If you guys want to bring a high, I used to have them here, but people ended up taking them, so I don't buy them anymore. Water pump. Water pump is directly below the alternator. You guys see it down here? Everybody wants to take a look in here. See the other pulley where the belt's at right here? Directly below the alternator.
Right there.
Yep.
Oh,
Everybody wants to pop their head in here.
Okay. That pulley down there?
Yep, that's the front. That's the pulley for the water pump.
All right.
Josh, Jackie, you guys want to take a look in here? Eventually, I'll have 2 trucks in here as well, so we're not all crowded. See right here?
Yeah. And you said that's the pulley for what now?
The water pump.
Water pump. Okay.
Like I said, it's directly below the alternator. Jackie, can you see?
I see it.
Oh, okay. The water pump, same thing. It is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. It is not cracked. It is not leaking. The water pump is also belt driven. Now we're going to do the belt, the serpentine belt. The serpentine belt is secured. It is not dry rotted, cracked, or frayed, and it is at the proper tension, which is no more than 3/4 inches of play. Okay? If there's any looser than that, when you start that engine, it would just fly off and it's not tight enough.
Do we have to say more than 3.5 or 3?
3/4.
Yeah, 3/4 of.
Anything with a numerical value on there, you had to tell them yes. Anything with a number. So that's everything on this side. I'll run through it again real quick. Exhaust system. Properly mounted, secure. There's no holes, no leaks, no obstructions. There's no signs of soot to indicate a leak. We walk over, open up the hood, radiator bottle. It is properly mounted. It is filled at a proper operating level. Cap is secure, no leaks. Radiator. It is properly mounted, secured. It is not cracked. It is not leaking. There's no loose or missing bolts. Lower, upper, and heater hoses. They are properly mounted. They're secured. They're not dry rotted. They're not leaking. Alternator. It is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. It's not cracked. All the wires are tight. Alternator is belt driven. Water pump is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. It is not cracked. It is not leaking. The water pump is also belt driven. Serpentine belt is secured. It is not dry rotted. It is not cracked. It is not frayed. And there's the proper tension, which is no more than 3/4 inches of play. That's everything on this side. It's that easy. Once we come over here, we're going to do all of our fluids right away. Just get them done. What I tell everybody, there's four things you're going to point out when you do the fluids. Instead of thinking of 4 different things, just think of one thing: fluids. Okay, it makes it seem easier. Windshield washer bottle. Cap is secure. It is not leaking. It is filled at a proper operating level. Engine oil and transmission dipsticks. They are both secured. They're tight. They're both filled at a proper operating level. They are not leaking.
So, do you have to check them in order to show him that they are?
He might. He's not going to make you pull it out, wipe it, but
Right.
But he might ask you how you know.
Right.
So you guys know how to check it, right? You pull it out, wipe it clean, put it back in.
So what if you say that it is, and then you check it and it's not?
It will be.
Okay.
We check it every day.
Okay.
I'll make sure everything's topped off, filled, everything. Yeah. I'm gonna make this as easy as possible for you guys. But he might ask you how you know. Well, you pull it out, wipe it clean, put it back in, pull it out.
Check. He probably won't ask for the
He's not going to ask you to actually do it. He just might ask you how you do it.
Okay.
The transmission, I always tell it's for the manufacturer's specifications, because transmissions, it's different for different vehicles.
Right.
Some have to be running, some have to be drive, some have to be neutral, some have to be off. So just tell him it's per the manufacturer's specifications. Power steering canister. The power steering canister is properly mounted. It is secured. The cap is secured. It is filled to the proper operating level. It is not leaking. Power steering hoses. There's 2 hoses, okay? Power steering hoses. They are secured. The clamps are tight. Power steering hoses, just like the other hoses, they're not dry rotted, cracked, or leaking. Okay? Here's that upper radiator hose right here. I was pointing at to the other side. Let me grab my flashlight.
Yeah, you can say the transmission oil, and then windshield wiper and transmission fluid.
So once we do all the fluids, we have 2 components over here we're going to point out to them. We did the alternator and water pump on the other side. We're going to do the air compressor. Here's your air compressor. You see that? This rusty old metal box right here. Everybody popped their head in there. I'll bring another truck in too eventually, so we're not all crowded around one. That's your air compressor. It doesn't work your AC or call it the cab, but it fills your air tanks to work your air brakes, okay? You gotta be fucking kidding me. Give air compressor. It is properly mounted. There's no loose or missing bolts. It is not leaking. The air compressor is gear driven. Gear driven.
Where did you say the air compressor was?
Rusty metal box.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right here
Okay.
is your air compressor. All right, the direct drive steering unit. You can't see it, but this hose right here, this hose goes all the way down to your direct drive steering unit, okay? Your direct drive steering unit is basically your power steering pump. So you're just gonna point down behind the engine, okay? Or just follow this hose. If you follow this hose all the way down, this hose connects to the direct drive steering. That's what delivers power steering fluid to the direct drive steering unit. Okay? Direct drive steering unit. It is properly mounted, secured. It is not cracked. It is not leaking. The direct drive steering unit is also gear driven. If it was a power steering pump, if it had a belt on it, it'd be a power steering pump. But it's gear driven, so it becomes your direct drive steering unit. Once we do that, your 2 components over here, remember gear driven, we're going to go to our steering column, or steering shaft. You guys see that right here, right?
That is what now?
Your steering shaft or steering column.
Okay.
Twice they came back on. Back on. Steering column right here, okay?
Okay.
Basically, it connects to your steering wheel.
Okay.
This is what steers us. That's your steering column or steering shaft.
So that's black stuff on it. It's cool.
It's grease, yeah. The steering column is properly mounted. It is not cracked. It is not bent. It is greased properly. Don't forget to tell me it is greased properly. Steering column comes with your steering gearbox right here. Okay? Big box right here is your steering gearbox. Steering gearbox is properly mounted and secured. There's no loose or missing bolts. It is not cracked. It is not leaking. Now we're going to do all of our steering linkage. Here's your pitman arm right here. The pitman arm, drag link. I'm going to pop their head in here. Jackie, you see that? Drag link. Steering knuckle. Right behind the tire, there's your steering knuckle. And then the tie rod. Everybody see that? Tie rod. The tie rod what ties the other wheel in on the other side so when this wheel turns. That wheel turns. So your steering linkage, pitman arm, drag link, steering knuckle, and tie rod. They're all properly mounted and secured. There's no loose or missing bolts. All the cotter keys or cotter pins are tight. If you look through here, see all the bolts? They had that little pin sticking through them. That's just so that nut or that bolt or that nut doesn't back off. Everybody see that? That's your cotter key or your cotter pin. That thing's constantly moving back and forth, so you don't want that nut backing off, moving so much that they drill a hole mainly through the pin. That's either your cotter pin or your cotter key. So that's all of our steering. Steering column, steering gearbox, pitman arm, drag link, steering knuckle, tie rod. So instead of thinking, like I said, just instead of thinking that as 6 separate things, just think steering. Steering column, steering gearbox, pitman arm, drag link, steering knuckle, tie rod. That's all your steering. Now we'll go to the suspension. All of our suspension. Shock absorber. Everybody knows what the shock absorber is, right? Everybody see that right there? Shock is properly mounted and secured. There's no loose or missing bolts. It is not cracked. It is not bent. Leaf springs. Here's your leaf springs. See these metal plates? Long metal plates that go all the way through here. All the metal plates stacked on top of each other. There's your leaf springs. So leaf springs are properly mounted and secured. Okay, they're all properly aligned. They're stacked on top of each other, so you gotta make sure they're all aligned on top of each other. They're all properly aligned. There's no crack. There's no loose. There's no damage. There's no missing leaves. Like I said, a lot. You don't have to tell them all that. I just give you enough to remember, so you can remember something. Okay. U-bolts. These 2 bolts right here that look like a letter U.
Okay.
Okay.
Those are your U-bolts. See them, Josh? U-bolts, they're secured. They're not cracked, they're not loose, they're not damaged, they're not missing. Okay? Leaf spring mounts. Here's your front. Here's the rear. Leaf spring mounts.
Leaf.
Yep, leaf springs. Yep. Everybody see that? There's your front. Yeah. We'll just look at the front of the leaf spring. Here's your front leaf spring mount. Rear leaf spring mount. They are properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked. They're not loose. They're not bent. They're not damaged. They're not missing. Like I said, you don't have to remember all that. I'm giving you enough to remember some. Okay? Remember, anything that's metal, it's not cracked, it's not bent, it's bolted on or welded on, it's not loose, it's not missing, if it's bolted on, all bolts are tight. If it's welded on, there's no broken weld. You'll see that as we go through. Okay? It's like I said, it seems like a lot today, but the more we do it, the easier it gets. That's all the suspension. Now we're going to go into the brakes. Here's your brake chamber. See that right here? Some people call it a brake can. The brake chamber, it is properly mounted and secure. The band clamp is tight. There's There's no loose or missing bolts, and it's not cracked or leaking. There's air. Okay, that's what works your air brakes. There's air in there, so it's not leaking. So the brake chamber is properly mounted, secured. The band clamp is tight. There's two halves that go together, and they put a clamp around and hold them together. So the brake chamber properly mounted, secured. Band clamp is tight. There's no loose or missing bolts, and it's not cracked, and it's not leaking. Brake hose. Think about like this. The air hose going to it.
This the one slim one right there.
Yep. Here's the brake hose right here.
All right.
There's an air hose. See that, Josh? No, it's rubber. It's a hose. Brake hose. It is properly mounted. The clamps are tight. It is not dry rotted, cracked, or leaking. Slack adjuster and push rods.
Slack adjuster
Slack
and
adjuster
rod.
push rod. Yep, right here.
All right.
Y'all see that? Yeah, Josh. Slack adjuster push rods. They are secured. There's no loose or missing bolts. They're not cracked. They're not bent. There is no more than 1 inch of play while the brakes are released. Okay, you have to tell it that. Remember anything I said? It's got a numerical value next to it. You gotta remember this. So there's no more than 1 inch of play while the brakes are released. Old trucks, you just had to get down there and manually adjust them. You had to get out, you had to show them. You can adjust the fork and show them. These adjust automatically, so you can show them. That's why we got to tell them no more than 1 inch of play while the brakes are released. Brake drum. You guys all, anybody done brake jobs before? Everybody know what a brake drum is?
No.
Jackie? The big round metal drum. It's inside the wheel. That's what stops. So you point to it right here. The brake drum. It is properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked. It is not warped. You know, sometimes when you stop, you feel your car pulsating back and forth when you stop. Brake drums this are warm when they get hot, when they get thin. The brake drum that is properly mounted and secured, it is not cracked, it is not warped. There is no signs of grease or oil. You had to show them, tell them that, okay? No signs of grease or oil. That's a hub oil seal right there. That's what keeps everything lubricated. If that cap was to come off, or if that was a leak, that hub oil would get on the brake drum and not allow that brake shoe and drum to stop it, okay? That's why I gotta tell them that. So the brake drum, mounted properly and secured. It is not cracked, it is not worn thin, there's no signs of grease or oil. The brake shoe, it is properly mounted. It is not cracked, it is not worn thin. There is at least a 1/4 inch of pad or a 1/4 inch of material, or the brake pad is at least a 1/4 inch thick. Okay, these start about 1 inch thick, and as you use them, obviously they wear down. Once they get down to a 1/4 inch, they're no good, they're done. That's all the brakes. Okay, brake chamber and hose, slack adjuster and push rod, brake drum and shoe. Tire. When you come out to the tire, there's 3 things they want to know about this tire, and you got to tell them all 3. They want to know the inflation, the condition, and the tread depth. Okay? For the inflation, tell them air's filled to the proper inflation. We checked it with an air gauge. Condition, just remember your ABCs. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. Tread depth, there's at least 4 32nds of an inch tread depth on the front tire. Okay? Just remember I, C, and D. Okay, inflation, condition, and depth. You gotta tell them all 3, or you don't get that check for your tire. Okay, like I said, you don't get half a point or half credit for anything. So
You said I what?
ICD, inflation, condition, and depth. So remember your inflation, the tire's filled at a proper inflation. We checked it with an air gauge. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. There's at least 4 32nds of an inch tread depth on the front tire, and it's all on that paper. The rim. It is properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked. It is not leaking. Okay, if that rim was cracked or bent, air would leak out of it from your tire. Lug nuts and shims. These are your lug nuts and shims. All your lug nuts, they are all secured. None are loose or missing. There's no shiny or silver threads showing to indicate a loose lug nut. Okay. So you see how rusty these threads are on this bolt? If you were to back that lug nut off, the threads underneath they wouldn't be rusty, they'd still be silver. So if you would see any of that silver, that's how you know you have a loose lug nut. So all the lug nuts and shims, they're all secure. There's no shiny or silver threads showing to indicate a loose lug nut. None are missing. The hub oil seal, it is properly mounted and secured. There's no loose or missing bolts. It is not cracked or leaking. It is filled to the proper operating level. Okay. Valve stem. Valve stem is down here. You guys know what the valve stem is, right? Where you put air in the tire.
Got any thought?
Remember here, tire, rim, lug nuts and shims, hub oil seal, valve stem. Mud flap. It is properly mounted and secured. It's not loose, it's not ripped, it's not torn, it's not missing. So on and so forth. Mirrors and mirror mounts. Okay, they're two separate parts. I'm going to name them together, but we're going to give a separate description for both. The mirror mounts, they are properly mounted, they're secured, they're tight, they're not cracked, they're not loose, there's no loose or missing bolts. Mirrors, they're clean, they're not cracked, they're properly mounted and secured. Door handle. Door handle outside and in are both working properly. Can you guys see that from over there? Door handles outside and in are both working properly. They want to know in case of emergency you're going to be able to exit this vehicle safely. That's why they want to see the doors working. You can't go out the door, you're going out the window. So the window and window crank are both working properly. Door hinges, they are properly mounted. They're not cracked, they're not bent. There's no loose or missing bolts. Test day, I'm going to have spare fuses up here. On test day, I'm going to have a pack of spare fuses up here for that examiner to see. We got to point out we have spare fuses. We are also equipped with a 50 amp circuit breaker. Can everybody see that right here? We also have a fully stocked first aid kit, 3 reflectorized triangles, and a fully stocked, fully charged fire extinguisher. I'll pull them out. They're all in the seat. Test day, I'll pull it out so you can see it. Handrail. It is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, loose, bent, damaged, missing, name it. driver's side steps. They are properly mounted, secured. They're not cracked. They're not bent. They're not loose. They will support the driver's weight. I don't have that on that paper, so you might want to make notes. They will support the driver's weight. This should take you about 15 minutes. Like I said, it seems like a lot. It didn't do it. Well, that was West Virginia. I'll be out there right now.
For what is this exactly?
That's no concern to us. I don't want to add any more than we need to.
Oh, okay.
It's for snow removal. Steps, okay? Driver steps. They're properly mounted, secured. And like I said, they're only looking for 2 flaws. I just give you enough to remember. You can tell them that they're not cracked. They're not bent. They're not loose. There's no loose or missing bolts. They will support the driver's weight, okay? Fuel tank. Do not call it a gas tank. If you call it a gas tank, you will not give you credit. It is a fuel tank. Fuel tank, it is secured. There's no holes, there's no rust, there's no leaks. The fuel tank straps are tight and properly aligned. The fuel cap is secured and it is not leaking, okay? Transmission. Okay, we're pointing the train. You can't see it, but everybody knows what the transmission is, right? Basically works all your gears. Transmission. It's on the back of the engine. It's tucked up behind the fuel tank here. So the transmission, it is properly mounted, secured. There's no loose or missing bolts. It is not leaking. The drive shaft. Does everybody know what the drive shaft is?
No, what is that?
So on the back. So if you ever see like the garbage trucks or these trucks when you drive them with the beds up. There's that pole. It looks like a pole. Long metal tube that you see spinning. When we get to it, I'll raise the bed and I'll show you. If you look down in here, you'll see a long metal tube right here. I'll move out of the way so you guys can look down there. But if you look down there between the frame, it's a long round metal tube. It's your drive shaft. It goes for your transmission and your rear end. Everybody see that? Everybody knows what it is?
The long silver
Yep.
pipe in the middle.
Pop your head there, Jack. You can so good. The drive shaft. The drive shaft is properly mounted, secure. It is not cracked. It is not bent. It is not loose. The drive shaft is properly greased. Okay. Bulkhead. We're gonna go to our bed. Here's your bulkhead. The front of your bed is your bulkhead. Body and the side rails. Okay, there's no holes, there's no damage, there's no broken welds, the bores are tight. Reflector, it is properly mounted, secured. It is clean, it is not cracked, it is proper color. Okay, anytime we pass a marker light, a reflector, anything, we're point it out. The truck frame, everybody knows what the truck frame is, right? These long metal beams right here, that's your frame of your truck. The truck frame and the cross member. So you got your frame on each side, you got 2 bars, 2 beams on each side of the truck. You got bars welded in between. Cross, the truck frame and cross members. They are not cracked. They're not bent. There's no loose or missing bolts, broken welds, there's no rust. You guys all right doing this in here? The light kind of sucks, but it's a lot cooler in here than the light's better outside. You can see more, but it gets hot as shit staying out there in that asphalt all day. So once we get back here, we're gonna do all of our suspension, and it doesn't matter what order you do it in. Like I said, I'll tell you guys, I'll go through all this with you guys as we get familiar with it. But like I said, it doesn't matter what order you do it in. Forget something. If you're back here doing a suspension back here and realize you forgot something up here on the suspension, you can walk back up and do it. So, auxiliary leaf spring. You said leaf spring all. There's leaf springs all by itself up there. Your auxiliary leaf springs. They are properly mounted. They're properly aligned. There's no crack, loose, damage, or missing leaves. Main leaf springs. Here's your main leaf springs right here. Yep. Main leaf springs. They are properly mounted, secured. They are all properly aligned. There's no cracks, loose, damage, or missing leaves. You look at this leaf all by itself down here. You see that bar all by itself? Everybody see that down there? Tommy, you see that button? That's your torque rod or your torque arm. So except either. Okay? It is properly mounted and secured. It's not loose, it's not cracked, it's not bent, it's not missing, it's not damaged. Okay, so you don't tell them all that, but I'm giving you guys enough to remember something, okay? Front and rear leaf spring mounts, just like on the front. Front and rear leaf spring mounts, they are properly mounted and secured. There's no loose or missing bolts, not cracked, bent, loose, damaged. U-bolts. We have U-bolts back here. You can't see them. They're on the axle behind the wheel. You got to step back here. You can see them. Look right there. You got to see the U-bolts right there. That's all of our suspension back here. Now we're going to go into the brakes. The brakes back here are exactly the same as the brakes in the front. Brake chamber. Everybody see the brake chamber right here, right? Yep. That big can is brake chamber. See that? Brake chamber is properly mounted, secured. There's no loose or missing bolts. Bang clamp is tight. It's not cracked, loose, damaged, missing, leaking. Brake hose, just like on the front. There's the hose right there going through. That's the brake hose. Slack adjuster and push rods on the back of the brake chamber, just like on the front. You can't see it, but you're still going to point out to it, okay? Slack adjuster and push rods, they're properly mounted secured. There's no loose or missing bolts, they're not cracked or bent. There is no more than 1 inch of play while the brakes are released. Brake drum. Brake drum's on the inside of this tire, on the inside of this rim on the inside. That is your brake drum. The brake drum is properly mounted. It is secured. It is not cracked. It is not warped. There is no signs of grease or oil. Brake shoe is properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked. It is not worn thin. There is at least a 1/4 inch of pad, or the brake pad at least a 1/4 inch thick. Okay. The dual tires, they're not rubbing or touching. They are spaced properly. There's no debris caught between the tires. A lot of times when you guys go out to the dumps, the garbage dumps, or whatever, a lot of times when you pull out, there'll be chunks of concrete or whatever stuck between your tires. get out on the road and start driving, get up to speed, throw one of them out and hit somebody behind you. That's why when you guys go to your dumps or whatever, if you're taking garbage out, or if you guys bust up sidewalk or whatever, take it to the dump, whatever. You always got to be sure there's nothing stuck between those tires, because if you throw something out, it's on you because you didn't check. The dual tires are not rubbing, they're not touching, they're spaced properly, there's no debris caught between the tires. Rear tires, remember inflation, condition, and depth. Dual to the tires, check for are filled into proper inflation, we check with an air gauge. There is at least 2 30 seconds of an inch tread depth on the rear tire. Over 4 30 seconds on front, 2 30 seconds in the back. Easiest way to remember is 2 tires, 2 30 seconds. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. Rim is properly mounted and secured. It is not cracked or bent. There are no non-factory welds. Okay, you see that weld right there? That rim comes from the factory welded like that. That's legal. If we were to crack it or snap it, we can't take it to our welder and have it re-welded. Once it's cracked, it's garbage. By law, we gotta throw it away. So the rim is not cracked or bent, it's properly mounted and secured, there's no non-factory welds. The lug nuts and shims, they are all secure. None are loose or missing, there's no shiny or silver threads shown to indicate a loose lug nut. Rear axle seal, okay? On the paper it's called a rear hub seal. On here you change it to rear axle seal. Rear axle seal. It is properly mounted and secured. There's no loose or missing bolts. It is not cracked or leaking. Just make sure you change that from hub oil seal to rear axle seal. Valve stem, not cracked, bent, or leaking. The cap is secure. Mud flap. It is properly mounted and secured. There's no loose or missing bolts. It's not cut. It's not ripped. It's not torn. It's not loose. It's not missing. Marker light and reflectors. They are properly mounted. They're not cracked, they're clean, they are proper color. Tailgate, it is properly mounted and secured. There's no holes, there's no damage, there's no broken welds. The tailgate is chained and it is latched properly. Left, center, and right. Tail lights, marker lights, and reflectors. They're all clean. They're not cracked or damaged. They're proper color, and they're mounted properly. Rear axle.
So you said left, center, and right,
Yeah.
all the right.
Yeah. We're not taking. So the truck we're taking doesn't. These are actually your tail lights down here. But the truck we're taking for the test don't have them, so these became our tail lights. So that's why I'm not pointing them out to you guys. I'm just. Rear axle. You guys know what the rear axle is?
Yeah.
So here's your rear axle right here. This big old metal ball. That's your rear end, and your axle is what basically got a long tube between each tire. Okay? See right here, rear axle. Rear axle is secured. It is not cracked, bent, there's no loose or missing bolts, and it is not leaking. That's the whole outside. You guys ready for your test?
No.
No.
That's it though?
That's the outside. Yeah.